Welcome back to the Professor Insight podcast, the space where we explore the intersection of artificial intelligence, neuroscience, and emerging technology, and turn it into something practical for your business, your strategy, and your everyday thinking. I'm your host, Professor Billy. As always, a quick note before we begin. This podcast is fully powered by AI tools, from content creation to script writing and voice generation. And yes, what you're hearing right now is a voice clone of me, brought to life with full human oversight and manual curation. Today's episode dives into one of the most provocative and thought-provoking studies I've come across recently, a yet-to-be-published but widely discussed paper from the MIT Media Lab titled Your Brain on ChatGPT, Accumulation of Cognitive Debt when Using an AI Assistant for Essay Writing Task. It's not just about how we use AI, but how AI may be using us, or more precisely, how it's reshaping our cognitive habits in ways we might not even notice. In this research, a team from MIT, Wellesley, and Massart placed students into three groups. One used ChatGPT to help write essays, another used a traditional search engine, and a third had no tools at all, just their brain. Over the course of 4 months, these participants wrote essays while hooked up to EEG headsets or brainwave headset tracking their brain activity, and the results were fascinating and honestly, a little sobering. The study found that those who used ChatGPT consistently showed weaker neural connectivity, reduced memory recall, and even less ownership over their own writing. In contrast, the brain-only group showed higher brain engagement, better memory of what they wrote, and a stronger sense of authorship. The researchers called this phenomenon cognitive debt, a kind of subtle atrophy in critical thinking and cognitive effort that builds up with repeated AI use. What's most interesting and important about these findings is that the effects go beyond just the quality of the writing. This study offers neurological evidence that when we outsource our thinking to AI tools, we're not just making things more efficient. We may also be weakening the mental muscles we rely on to learn, reason, and create. This isn't a call to abandon AI, but it is a wake-up call about how we use it, especially in education. If we rely too heavily on LLMs to do the intellectual heavy lifting, we might pay a price down the road in the form of reduced cognitive engagement and even a diminished sense of agency. So in this episode, we're going to unpack the design of the study, the neurological findings, and what this all means for the future of learning, thinking, and creativity. It's one of those moments where psychology, technology, and education collide, and we need to understand what's really at stake. Let's dive in.
We've all felt the magic of AI, right? Instant answers, effortless writing, complex problems simplified in seconds. But what if those digital shortcuts are quietly rewiring the most powerful tool you own, your brain? What's really happening inside your head when you rely on these incredible tools for thinking and learning?
That's a crucial question, definitely.
Yeah.
Because as AI becomes woven into the fabric of our daily lives, we often focus just on its capabilities, what it can do. But the human side of the equation, how our own cognition adapts or maybe even changes when we offload thinking to a machine, that's often overlooked. It's really time we put our own brains under the microscope.
Absolutely. And that's exactly our mission today. We're going to take a deep dive into a really groundbreaking study from MIT. They used cutting-edge brain scanning tech to explore just how using AI for learning tasks literally changes your brain activity. It seems to influence your ability to think, to learn, maybe even to remember. So our goal is to unpack the very real cognitive impact of AI and what it means for how you engage with information in this AI-driven age.
Yeah. And to truly understand what they found, we first need to quickly peek inside the brain, metaphorically speaking. The study did this using a technique called electroencephalography, or EEG. Think of EEG like placing tiny, supersensitive microphones on your scalp.
Microphones for brain noise?
Kinda. They aren't listening to your specific thoughts, thankfully, but to the collective electrical symphony of your brain as billions of neurons communicate. It's the background hum of cognition.
That's a great way to put it. And that symphony isn't just random noise, right? It comes in different brainwaves.
Exactly. Rhythmic patterns of electrical signals, and each one is associated with distinct states of mind and cognitive processes. It's like different instruments playing different parts of the score, depending on what your brain is actively doing at that moment.
Okay, so we don't need to get super technical, but what are the main waves they looked at?
Right, let's just cover the key players the researchers focused on. First, you've got alpha waves. When you see a lot of alpha activity, it's often linked to deep internal attention. Like when you're thinking about the meaning of words or brainstorming new ideas, it's your brain doing intense internal work, sort of actively searching its own memory banks for connections.
Okay, internal search. Then what about beta waves?
Beta waves are faster. They're associated with active thinking, concentration, and really maintaining attention on things outside of yourself, external stuff. So if you're laser focused on a task, your brain is probably buzzing with beta waves. It's that sharp, focused effort.
Got it. Focused externally. What's next?
Next up, theta waves. These are typically seen when your brain is under a significant working memory load or when it's engaged in what we call executive control. What that means is if your brain is juggling multiple ideas, planning complex actions, or coordinating different cognitive bits and pieces, theta activity is often high. It's your brain putting in a lot of mental effort, basically.
Juggling ideas, making effort. Okay. And the last one.
And finally, the slowest ones, delta waves. Now, we often associate these with deep sleep, sure, but in waking states, they can reflect large-scale integrative processes. Essentially, your brain trying to deeply encode context and sustain attention on the big picture is when your brain is really digging in, trying to connect disparate pieces of information for a, comprehensive understanding.
Deep integration. Okay, that makes sense. Alpha for internal search, beta for external focus, theta for effort and juggling, delta for deep integration.
You got it. So with that brain listening tech in mind, let's dive into how MIT put it to work with real people. This particular deep dive is based on a pretty rigorous 4-month study. They had 54 participants aged 18 to 39, mostly university students and researchers from the greater Boston area, including places like MIT and Harvard.
And the way they set it up was really clever, wasn't it? To compare different ways of working.
Yeah, the experimental design was key. It allowed them to compare, like you said, apples to oranges to, well, just plain old brains. Participants were randomly split into 3 distinct groups for a series of essay writing tasks.
Okay, group 1.
The first was the LM group. These folks were only allowed to use OpenAI's GPT-4o as their sole resource. No other apps, no browsers. AI was their one and only tool for writing these essays.
Wow, strictly AI. And group 2.
Then there was the search engine group. They could use any website they wanted. Most chose Google. Naturally, but crucially, no large language models allowed. The researchers were apparently quite meticulous, even adding AI to their search queries to try and filter out AI-enhanced answers.
Ah, clever. Okay, and the third group, my favorite.
Right, the brain-only group. These participants were completely unplugged, totally offline, forbidden from using any online tools at all.
Yeah.
They had to rely solely on their own knowledge, their memory, their internal processing power to write the essays. Pure human cognition.
Just their wits. I love it. So they're writing essays on things like loyalty or happiness.
Exactly. And throughout the study, their brain activity was meticulously recorded using those EEG headsets while they were writing. Plus, after each session, they were interviewed about their experience. This gave crucial qualitative data, their subjective feelings, alongside the objective neural signals.
So you get the brain waves and what the person felt like, a complete picture.
Precisely.
All right, so with all this incredible brain data, what was the big reveal? Were their brains truly working differently depending on the tool?
Oh, it was quite striking. The EEG analysis clearly showed that each group was employing completely divergent cognitive strategies. It wasn't just a slight difference. We're talking about fundamentally different ways their brains were going about the task, different neural patterns.
Wow, fundamentally different. That's a huge takeaway right there.
Yeah.
So let's start with the brain-only group, the unplugged ones. What did their brain activity look like? Were they really, working harder, but in a good way?
Absolutely. What's fascinating here is how the brain-only group consistently showed the strongest, widest-ranging brain networks across all the main frequency bands. They measured alpha, theta, and delta. Their brains were, you could say, firing on all cylinders.
Okay, so more activity across the board. What does that mean in terms of thinking?
Well, they showed much higher alpha connectivity. Remember, alpha, internal focus, semantic processing. This suggests greater internal semantic search and creative ideation, particularly in their frontoparietal regions.
That's the planning and thinking part of the brain.
Yeah, responsible for things like planning, attention, executive functions. A lot of your higher level thinking happens there. So their brains were actively generating ideas, combining concepts drawn purely from their own memory.
So it's like their brains were running a full-scale internal search engine, retrieving and remixing information completely on the fly. And what about the mental effort? Could you see that too?
You definitely could. Their theta connectivity was significantly higher. Theta, remember, is linked to cognitive load and executive control. This indicates their frontal regions were actively coordinating multiple cognitive components, juggling ideas, planning the essay structure. You could practically see the mental effort in the signals.
More theta means more brain sweat, basically.
Pretty much. And they also displayed elevated delta connectivity, which reflects that deep internal processing, sustained attention, and again, considerable effort. If we try to picture the information flow, it suggests a bottom-up process for this group. Their semantic and sensory brain regions were essentially feeding novel ideas upwards into the frontal executive system. They were building the essay from the ground up internally.
Okay, so their brains were going deep, connecting dots from within, really constructing something original. Now, the big contrast, the LLM group. Were their brains also putting in that kind of deep work?
Well, it was a stark contrast, actually. The LLM group showed the weakest overall neural coupling, much less interconnected activity. Specifically, they had significantly lower frontal theta connectivity.
Less data. So less cognitive load, less effort.
Exactly. It's consistent with the reduced working memory burden because the LLM was providing so much external cognitive support, suggesting text, outlining structure. They weren't having to juggle as many ideas internally. The AI was doing a lot of that heavy lifting for them.
Okay, so the mental juggling was outsourced. What else was different in their brain patterns?
The LOM group also showed underengagement of alpha and beta networks. Less alpha means less internal ideation. Less beta means less sustained concentration on the task itself, perhaps. Their information flow seemed more top-down.
Top-down.
Meaning their frontal cortex, the executive part, seemed more focused on integrating and filtering the AI's contributions rather than actively generating content from scratch like the brain-only group. It's like managing the AI's output versus creating your own.
Wow. So the first really big takeaway here seems to be convenience isn't free. It comes with a cognitive trade-off. Using the LLM made the task feel easier, it reduced that mental load, but the user's brain engaged less deeply in those rich associative processes that define unassisted creative thinking.
That's a great way to put it. Some of the uniquely human thinking, the deep connective work, was clearly being offloaded onto the machine.
That's a profound point. It really does sound like the brain adapts to become more of a manager of information rather than a generator. Okay, what about the middle group, the search engine users? They weren't completely offloading like the LLM group, but they weren't totally on their own either. Where did they land?
Yeah, the search engine group showed, as you might expect, intermediate brain engagement. They were definitely still cognitively active, but their alpha and theta connectivity was lower than the brain-only group.
So less internal searching and less heavy mental juggling than the brain-only folks.
Right. It implies that the ability to just search for facts externally reduced the need for that really intense internal memory retrieval and coordination. This fits nicely with the famous Google effect, doesn't it? Where we tend to remember where to find information online rather than the information itself.
Ah, yes, the outsourcing of memory location.
Yeah.
So their brains adopted a more externally oriented cognitive mode compared to the deeply integrated state of the brain-only group. It's a different kind of engagement, less internal memory digging, more external fact-finding and integration.
Precisely. And it gets even more nuanced when we compare the two tool-assisted groups, LLMs versus search engines, because they show different kinds of offloading. The search engine group's connectivity patterns were consistent with handling a higher external information load. They were engaging memory retrieval, visual processing, executive integration, especially in those alpha and theta bands.
So they were actively pulling in info from various places and putting it together, more bottom-up.
Exactly. They were actively seeking out diverse sources and processing them. The LLM group, in contrast, exhibited greater internal executive network coherence, meaning the brain's control center was highly focused, but maybe more on managing the AI's single stream of output. And they showed more bilateral integration, particularly in beta and delta bands, suggesting maybe a focus on planning how to use the AI content, often with that top-down approach of filtering what the AI gave them.
So one is about actively finding and integrating lots of external info. The other is more about managing and refining a pre-digested block of content from the AI. This reveals a second key insight, perhaps. Not all digital tools affect your brain in the same way. Some seem to encourage exploration, like search engines, while others might encourage more curation or management, like LLMs.
That's a very good summary of the neural findings. And beyond the fascinating brainwave data, the study also looked at the behavioral side, the actual learning impacts. And the findings there are just as striking, maybe even more concerning in some ways.
They really are. One of the things that jumped out at me was the a homogeneity, the sameness of the essays. The study found that essays from the LLM group were remarkably similar to each other, showing significantly less variation compared to essays from the other two groups.
Yeah, much less deviation. Whereas the brain-only group, as you'd expect, showed strong variability. Each essay reflected an individual's unique approach to the topic.
It's almost like everyone using the LLM ended up channeling the same voice, right? Makes me think about those essays we all wrote in school where every student's perspective, even if flawed, was so distinct. It sounds like AI might be smoothing out those unique brain fingerprints.
And this sameness might be linked to another concerning finding. The LLM group reported feeling low ownership of the essays they produced. They didn't feel like the work was really theirs. And get this, they also struggled to quote accurately from their own essays just minutes after writing them.
Really? They couldn't remember what they just wrote with the AI's help.
Apparently not very well. Both the search engine and brain-only groups performed comparably and much better in recalling their own content. It seems the very convenience of getting instant answers from the LLM actually impaired their ability to accurately retrieve and recall the information later. This points to maybe a third critical insight. True understanding often comes from the struggle. When you remove the effort, you might also remove the deep encoding and that sense of ownership that comes with it.
That really highlights what they call the cognitive load paradox, doesn't it? LLMs are fantastic at reducing that feeling of effort, making tasks feel easier, leading to higher reported productivity sometimes. We all feel that. But this ease, as the study demonstrates, comes at a cost. While LLMs reduced mental effort, they simultaneously seem to diminish critical thinking capabilities and led to decreased engagement in those deep analytical processes.
Absolutely. Users of the generative AI tools reported less effort needed for retrieving and curating information. Their focus shifted more towards just verifying or slightly modifying the AI-generated responses. This points to a significant shift, doesn't it? From active critical reasoning, is this right? Does this make sense? How does it connect to a more passive oversight role? Does this look okay? Can I use this?
Wow.
This might be our fourth insight. AI shifts you from being the creator to being the editor, from the deep thinker to more of a filter.
And this passivity, this reliance on a single synthesized answer, raises critical concerns about what many people are calling the echo chamber effect, right?
Exactly. Unlike traditional search engines, which ideally present you with diverse viewpoints and sources you have to sift through, LLMs tend to provide these neat, synthesized, singular responses. This can inadvertently discourage lateral thinking and independent judgment. You might get trapped in information environments that just reinforce what you already believe, or what the AI thinks is the most probable answer.
So you lose that serendipity of stumbling across a conflicting viewpoint.
Potentially, yes. What's concerning is the study suggested that when using LLMs, participants engaged in more biased information, querying their prompts might have reflected their existing views more strongly. And if the LLM itself has any leanings, or is just optimized for probable answers, it can reinforce that bias. Since LLMs often give you the most statistically likely output, you might simply miss opportunities to engage with challenging or alternative perspectives. This ultimately affects critical thinking and could lead to a narrower, possibly more biased understanding. So maybe a fifth insight. AI's drive for efficiency can inadvertently narrow your intellectual scope, limiting your exposure to diverse ideas.
Wow. And the study even tested this idea of AI's preference in a really interesting way with an AI judge.
Yeah, this was fascinating. They created an AI judge using the same LLM model, GPT-4o, to evaluate the essays alongside human teachers. And guess what? The AI judge consistently scored the essays, including those written with AI help, around a 4 out of 5 for things like overall quality, structure, language. It generally liked them.
It liked its own style, perhaps.
Perhaps. Because the human teachers often gave much lower scores, especially for content quality or uniqueness. Sometimes they rated the same essays as low as 1 or 2 out of 5, even ones the AI judge thought were great. This raises a really important, maybe slightly uncomfortable question, and our sixth insight. Are AI tools, if we just use them without thinking, inadvertently training us to write or think in a way that they find optimal, a way that might lack the originality, the critical depth, or that human spark that we as humans actually value?
It forces us to ask, what are we truly valuing when we use these tools? Are we optimizing for AI approval or human insight? That's quite a thought.
It really is.
Okay, so we've seen the current impact, the brain changes, the behavioral effects. This all sounds a bit worrying in some ways. What does this mean for the future? How can we mitigate these cognitive trade-offs? Is there a way to use AI smarter?
Well, one of the most insightful parts of this study, for me at least, came in session 4. This is where they had some participants switch tools, and this gives us a more nuanced view, maybe some clues for the path forward.
Okay, what happened when they switched?
So those who had previously relied heavily on LLMs, but then in session 4 had to write without any AI, the study calls them the LLM to brain group. They showed weaker neural connectivity. Their alpha and beta networks seemed underengaged compared to those who'd been practicing without AI all along.
So it's like their brains hadn't fully re-engaged those deeper processing muscles. Even though they weren't complete novices, they underperformed compared to the always unassisted group.
That's what the data suggests. It implies that previous heavy reliance on AI might limit or hinder the deeper neural integration needed for complex cognitive tasks when you then try to do it alone. It's like your brain get a little, well, dependent, maybe.
A bit out of practice with the heavy lifting. Okay, but you said nuance. Was there another side of this?
There was, and this is quite encouraging, participants who had started as brain-only users doing the work themselves first and then were introduced to LLMs. The brain-to-LLM group showed something remarkable. They showed a significant increase in brain connectivity across all frequency bands when they used the AI tool on a topic they were already familiar with.
Wait, so using AI after doing the work yourself actually boosted their brain activity?
It seemed to, yes. It suggests that AI, when introduced after an initial period of self-driven effort and understanding, could actually enhance engagement and neural integration. This is perhaps the most hopeful insight, maybe number 7. AI isn't inherently bad for your brain, but the timing of its introduction and perhaps your prior engagement with the topic profoundly impacts its cognitive effect.
That's a crucial distinction. Wow. So it's not a simple case of AI bad for brain. This deep dive really paints a very nuanced picture. The convenience is real, the cognitive load reduction is real, but it comes with that trade-off. Your brain might not go as deep, might not make those rich connections or engage critical thinking as much as when it works unassisted.
Right. And the findings strongly suggest a potential educational model, or even just a personal learning strategy. Yeah. Maybe delay introducing AI tools until learners, or you yourself, have engaged in sufficient self-driven cognitive effort first. Build the foundation yourself. This approach might promote both immediate tool efficacy. You use the tool better because you understand the task and lasting cognitive autonomy. You don't just become good at using the tool, you remain good, maybe even get better, at performing the task independently.
Build the cognitive muscle first, then add the power tool. I like that.
Exactly.
No, we should be fair. This is one study, right? It's incredibly insightful, but it does have limitations, like all research.
Oh, absolutely. No single study ever tells the whole story. It's crucial to note the participants were primarily university students, mostly from the Boston area, a specific demographic. Future research really needs to include a larger, more diverse population, different age groups, different professions, different cultural backgrounds, different locations, to see if these findings hold true more broadly.
And didn't you mention the session 4 results, the switching part, were based on fewer people?
That's right. While those session 4 findings on switching tools are really intriguing and potentially very important, they were based on a smaller subset of the original participants. So more data collection is definitely needed to solidify those conclusions. Science is always building, always refining.
Good points. Okay, so wrapping this up, we've unpacked how tools like large language models can fundamentally change the way your brain engages with learning and thinking. They offer incredible efficiency, they reduce that feeling of cognitive load, but this ease can come at the expense of deep neural integration, critical thinking, maybe even your sense of ownership over your own ideas.
And it leads to a really interesting thought. As AI becomes even more seamlessly integrated into our lives, maybe the most crucial skill isn't just knowing how to use it effectively. Perhaps it's developing the wisdom to know when to put it aside, when to consciously choose to let your own brain flex its cognitive muscles to do the hard, sometimes messy, but ultimately rewarding work of thinking for yourself.
So, the final provocative thought for you listening right now. What does it mean for you to be truly well-informed, truly knowledgeable, if your information is always pre-digested, homogenized by an algorithm, and potentially lacking that unique, critical human spark? It's a question worth considering every time you reach for that AI assistant, every time you hit generate, and every time you choose or don't choose to outsource your thinking.